Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some PathOfExile discussion. So today I wanted to have a look at the 3.15 meta a couple of weeks in. Have a look at what builds have been working, what builds haven't, what have been the real breakouts, but also have a look at some of the predictions that were made before the league, between the patch notes and the actual league, and see how accurate some of those have been. So firstly, this is a website called POE.ninja, and what it does is it aggregates the players that are the 15,000 highest experience points in each league, as well as the 15,000 deepest delvers. So this information comes from GGG's published race events and league ladders, which is a page here that will list the top 15,000 characters by XP at any given time. You'll see the first page is dominated by level 100 characters, so they're all the same. But if we dump down a little bit, you'll see there's a whole bunch of players that are level 94, various amounts of XP. You can also view this as a delve depth ladder as well. So both of those exist, and that then allows more characters to fit onto the ladder board. So that's why there's a total of 18,475 characters represented in the Expedition softcore trade-enabled version. And similar-ish numbers if you look at it in hardcore or solo self-found. So firstly, this provides a wealth of information about what ascendancies are being played at a fairly high level, what items are popular, at least for unique items, and also what skills are commonly used as main skills, and also what skills are commonly being used in other setups as well. So, you can see that Flame Dash, for instance, is overwhelmingly the most popular movement skill still. So, let's have a quick look firstly at the Ascendancy situation. You'll see that we've got Necromancers at 17% are the top Ascendancy in trade-enabled softcore, with Gladiator and Raider right behind on their heels. And then there's Hierophant, Ascendant, Occultist, Saboteur, Deadeye, Assassin, and Berserker. And then, you sort of see there's a constant drop-off, and then there's a big drop-down to Guardian, Elementalist, Pathfinder, Trickster, Slayer, Champion, Chieftain, Juggernaut, and Inquisitor, all miles below. So, the first things to note here is that there is no Ascendancy that is head and shoulders above all of the rest. And I think this is a good thing. This is a sign that partially indicates a diverse meta. So what we're talking about here is that we don't have a repeat of the situation in Legion League, where you had 41% of the player base by mid to late league were playing on Cyclone Slayers, and another 8% were playing Cyclone on a different Ascendancy. It was absolutely crazy to see how dominated Legion was by that build. Or probably even more extreme was Delirium with Aura Stackers. Although Aura Stackers were found across a couple of Ascendancies, they were primarily Ascendants, and you would have an unbelievable number of Ascendants, especially late in the league. I think it may have been something like 60% of the ladder was made up of Ascendants late league. And all of them, had the key uniques that built up an Aura Stacker at the time. So you would see that they would have multiple copies of Voices socketed. So there is no dominant Ascendancy. That said, there are a lot of Ascendancies that are in a pretty bad place at the moment. I think one of the things that should happen for 3.16 is that all of the sort of bottom 8 Ascendancies should probably have a little bit of love given to them. Maybe with the exception of Champion. Champion's been really good for a really long time, and I don't think it's a problem that Champion's gone off meta for one league. But all of the rest of these, and particularly things like Juggernaut that have been terrible for a long time, Trickster hasn't recovered from its last nerf. I think a number of these could do with some considerable numerical buffs. Numerical buffs are enough. The Raider is the number 3 Ascendancy at the moment, and it was actually in this dumpster tier for a long period of time. Then it got a few changes that were just purely numerical, and they pushed it from bottom 3 to top 3, where it's been top 3, even though it got nerfed in 3.15. Raider took a couple of little nerfs in this league. It's gone from overwhelmingly seen as unplayable to one of the top Ascendancies in the game, and that just took a few numerical tweaks. So that's the Ascendancy situation. But skills are probably more defining to a character's playstyle than their Ascendancy is. And so let's have a look through the skill setup. Skills are what I would term not in a particularly bad spot diversity-wise, but there is one big outlier. So let's start with that. Spectral Shield Throw. 18% of top 15,000 players are using Spectral Shield Throw as a skill that is five or more linked. Of those, there are two different builds that are popular. There are gladiator builds that scale physical damage off their shield, and then there are raider builds that use cold damage conversion and then scale cold damage that way. Most of the builds that are playing this skill are gladiators, but raiders are still also somewhat represented. A very large number of people are using Lionized Vision on this build. Lionized Vision just does a lot. Granting the ability for you to have level 15 Pierce as a pseudo link. The fact that it's got 160 dexterity requirement might seem like a drawback. It's actually a bonus. It makes it easier to chrome this item because you want a lot of green gems on Spectral Shield Throw. Then it's just got a huge amount of armor, solid life, and most importantly, physical attack damage leached as mana. That is really significant. The drawback of enemy projectiles pierce you is pretty much a completely irrelevant thing outside group play, and even in group play, it's not very meaningful. Otherwise, there's a number of things people tend to use. Taste of Hate is really, really good, but that is being used by the Raiders. Rumi's Concoction is being used by everyone that can get their hands on it, because it is probably the best flask in the game at the moment. And Prismatic Eclipse is one of the most commonly used weapons. Prismatic Eclipse is used with green sockets to get 36% global increased attack speed, which is a huge buff on these builds. So this is the top performing build of the league, the Gladiator version of this, and the Raider version is probably in the top 5 builds as well. Yeah, it's definitely in the top 5 builds. So this should definitely be on your radar if you're looking for something new to try out. One of the things that's really good with Spectral Shield Throw, and we'll get to this when we talk about hardcore and also solo self-found, is that this is a build that performs extremely well on genuinely dumpster tier gear. And you will see that when we flip over to the hardcore versions of this and to the solo self-found versions of this league, you'll see that the meta share of Spectral Shield Throw just grows in those harder game modes. Especially when you come to hardcore, the fact that you have all of the powerhouse defenses of the Gladiator Ascendancy just takes things even further. So that's Spectral Shield Throw. The second top build is Raise Spectre. Raise Spectre has been good for a while, and it is being played overwhelmingly by the Necromancer Ascendancy. Raise Spectre is the only minion build that is doing particularly well at the moment, and it is definitely doing really well. So most people that are playing it are using it in conjunction with Triad Grip for elemental conversion, with probably the most popular choice being converting all damage to cold, which then allows your Spectres to freeze. But there's a lot of variety when it comes to Raise Spectre setups. So Raise Spectre is a skill that has a tremendous amount of diversity within the playstyle, just based upon what type of Spectres that you're raising. So you'll find that there's just so many different ways that people play this build. If you're interested in learning a bit more about it, there's a couple of guides that have been put out to it by the Twitch streamer Gazzy TV, and you can find those on YouTube. He knows a lot more about Spectres than I do. But it's the second top build of the league. Coming in at number 3 is Forbidden Rite as a totem build. So Forbidden Rite, you'll notice when we filter to show only the Forbidden Rite characters, there are 2 different ascendancies that have any level of representation at all. We have 1,369 people playing the skill, of which 1,319 are Hierophants. Of the other 50, 36 of them are Occultists. So the Occultists are mostly self-casting Forbidden Rite, and using the Occultist Chaos Explosions as well, and scaling all sorts of Chaos damage hit. This is a niche thing, and it is something I'm looking at exploring myself, but it is definitely not the most popular way to play Forbidden Rite. Forbidden Rite and Totems have tremendous synergy, and the primary reason for this is the Cluster Jewel exclusive notable, I think it's called Ancestral, what is it again? It's Ancestral something, not Bond, Ancestral Preservation. Totems have 30% increased life, 10% physical damage reduction. 10% physical damage reduction is all upside, but it's not important. And Totems gain 40% chaos resistance. Because of the mechanics of Forbidden Rite, Forbidden Rite causes chaos damage to the entity casting it equal to 40% of that entity's life, and then it causes damage to enemies that are hit by its projectiles that scales with that amount of self-damage. So with Ancestral Preservation, instead of taking the totems taking 32% of their life in damage every time they cast the skill, so that being 40% of their life scaled down by the 20% chaos resistance totems initially have, they only take half that damage because their chaos resistance is increased to 60% by Ancestral Preservation. But additionally, the 30% increased totem life means that those totems are able to do more damage as well. So with all of that in mind, Ancestral Preservation is really powerful on these builds, and you can stack this multiple times, getting the benefits of the 30% increased life on every medium cluster jewel that you have. So that is the reason that these builds have been doing a lot of damage. In addition to that, just totems can be a safe playstyle. It is fairly dependent upon difficult to source unique helmets. So Verity's Veil is very important to the build, and this is a Maven exclusive drop. It's been quite expensive all league. It is starting to crater in price now, and it wouldn't surprise me if this becomes available on a budget soon, because ultimately people run the Maven for Maven's Orbs, especially as people have more of a pool of wealth for crafting. And so as more and more people are getting to the point of being able to take down the Maven, Verity's Veil is becoming more and more available. That said, you don't actually need, in order to play this build, you need Soul Mantle. You don't need Verity's Veil. You can use the much weaker but much more accessible unique rings Kikazaru ×2, and then you can get started on that basis. I've respec'd my Absolution build into this, and it's been an interesting playstyle so far, but I do need to change around a lot of gear. So if you're interested in playing this build, check out some of the builds that are doing well on POE.ninja. Don't copy mine because it's sort of in a half respec state at the moment. So that's Forbidden Right. That's the number 3 build of the league. Now, next up is Toxic Rain. Now, Toxic Rain's in an interesting place. So this is also being played as a raider, overwhelmingly. It can be played by other ascendancies, even Trickster, Pathfinder, Deadeye, but it's overwhelmingly played as a raider build. Raider just has a lot going for it for the Toxic Rain. Toxic Rain is a build that likes being hard to hit, and Raider is extremely defensively oriented in being hard to hit. You move fast, which is both powerful for clear speed, and also move speed is one of the best defensive stats in the game. And when an enemy does hit the right place on the screen, they're also quite likely to miss you because you have a lot of evasion and a lot of dodge. And that gives time for your Toxic Rain projectiles to actually kill things. You'll notice a lot of players who are using Toxic Rain also use Caustic Arrow. This is so that they've got one skill for bossing and one skill for killing trash. And so these two are often used together. The reason that you only see 36% of players using Caustic Arrow here is that PoE.ninja only counts things that are being played in a 5-link. A lot of players will have a 4-link for one of these skills and a 5 or 6-link for the other. And then later on in the league, they'll upgrade to having a 6-link for both. So that's the situation with Toxic Rain, overwhelmingly being played on Raider. One thing to note is that in the past, Toxic Rain mines have been popular. Toxic Rain mines have just collapsed in meta share. I'm not sure actually if this is because the build has gotten worse, or if it's just that people don't like playing it, or if it's that no high profile players have played Toxic Rain mines for a while. I'd have to do some more research into that, but for the moment it looks like that is basically not being seen. Also, these builds, basically all of them use acrobatics and phase acrobatics for defense. Dodge is an incredibly strong defensive layer in the game at the moment, always has been, but it's been getting stronger as monster pack size goes up. And so this has been something that you'll see everyone using acrobatics, phase acrobatics, Wind Dancer as a defensive layer on all of these builds. So that's the top bow build at the moment. Next up we have Cyclone. Cyclone has in the past been 3 different builds, fundamentally. So there is Impale-based physical hit Cyclone, there is Cast on Critical Strike Cyclone, and there is Cast while channeling Cyclone. Cast while channeling Cyclone is probably more like a spellcaster build than a Cyclone build, but it's only a small percentage of people who played Cyclone. Cast on Critical Strike has taken a smashing nerf in 3.15. This is one of the builds that has gone from being consistent high performer down to being like a not very high performer at all at the moment. It is still working. There are still players who are making cast on critical strikes work, but it has fallen very, very, very far in the meta. The reason for this is the mana changes. So it used to be that triggering a skill with Cast on Critical Strike had no mana multiplier to the skill, to the payload. Well, it had a mana multiplier of 0 to the payload skill. Now it no longer has that mana multiplier of 0. And so that means that you need to feed a tremendous amount of mana into a Cast on Critical Strike build in order to make the payload go off. Some of the ways that you can do that, if you're determined to make it work, you can use Lavinia's Spirit, which is a unique mana flask that whilst it is being used, your skills cost no mana. Or you can use Vile Clarity, which is a temporary aura that causes all of your skills to cost no mana again. But the consequence of using these strategies to manage mana is that generally speaking, you can't run as many auras as you used to. And that's one of the main things that's really hit Cast on Critical Strike builds hard. They haven't died. They're still definitely a part of the meta. And in fact, you can still see 19% of people who are using Cyclone are using Ice Nova linked to Cyclone, which means Cast on Critical Strike. And a further 9% using Ice Spear and 7% are using Ball Lightning. So the build is certainly not dead, but it is in a much, much, much worse state than it has been in the past. So that is Cyclone for Cast on Critical Strike. Castle Channeling is a totally different build, and not something that I've ever really played enough with to be sure of all of the things. And most of the time, though, Cyclone linked cast while channeling is often used for utility setups, like spamming Unearth all over the place, then spamming an Offering. And so there's a lot of different things you can do with that, and those seem to have survived pretty well. But Cyclone is primarily now being played as a physical damage thing. So you're using Brutality support, using melee physical damage support, and you're possibly using Impale support until you can outgrow that in the current meta. After this, we're going to start seeing a bit of a fall off to where there's a very large number of skills that are seeing a fair amount of play without being what you would term massive successes. So that's things like Elemental Hit, Vile Lightning Strike. One that's interesting though is Ice Trap. Ice Trap was hyped a lot before the league. I was really looking forward to giving Ice Trap a go at some point during the league, and it just doesn't seem to have performed all that well for a lot of players. One popular streamer, Tripolar Bear, had been running it for a long time and put together a really good guide on it. So based on that, I'm going to assume a lot of players league started it, and then a number of players just decided, you know what, this isn't for me, and the performance hasn't been so good that it's pulled players that didn't want to play a Trapper to feel like I have to play a Trapper. Also, the Saboteur builds have come out on top of the Raider builds for Ice Trap. Ice Trap has certainly functioned. It just hasn't been as good as I think a lot of us were expecting it to be before the league started. Then you've just got a huge, huge, huge list of other skills down the line. Eye of Winter is getting a little bit of play, and Spectral Helix is seeing a little bit of play. So keep Spectral Helix in mind, because when we start looking at the harder difficulty modes, you'll start seeing that. But there is a very large number of builds that are seeing like at least a couple of dozen players that are using them in the in the top 15,000 players by XP. So for instance, Ethereal Knives, not a popular build this league at all, but 48 people are using it in the top 15,000. Likewise, you'll see that, well, even Soul Rend is getting played by some people in the in the ladder. So lots of things are still viable, but that's an overview of all the things that are doing best. So now let's have a look at the harder game modes. So firstly, we'll start with Hardcore. And what you'll notice, firstly, is that Spectral Shield Throw and Gladiator Ascendancy are both miles ahead of where they were. And when we do filter to show only Spectral Shield Throw, you'll see that Gladiator is towering over the Raider here. Whereas the percentages in Softcore were 77% Raider, 77% Gladiator, 22% Raider, and 1% whatever. Here it's 89 and 8. So the reason for this is that in Hardcore, being a Gladiator is a really good thing. Having max block and max spell block is a tremendously powerful defensive layer. Being a Gladiator, you also have access to reasonably good life nodes. You're close to the Scion life wheel. So for that reason, the Hardcore game mode Spectral Shield Throw does really, really well in it. Other builds that are doing well there are Ray Spectre is doing well. And interestingly, Exsanguinate, but played as mines. So I put together Exsanguinate as Trapper, actually. Trap or Mine can both work, but it looks like the Exsanguinate traps are doing particularly well there. Solo Self-Found comes next. And Solo Self-Found is even more dominant towards the Spectral Shield Throw setup. So here we've got 25% of players playing it, and again, overwhelmingly on Gladiators. Here we have another strength that Spectral Shield Throw plays to, and that is the fact that its gear is so easy to get. So if you think of a physical damage weapon, let's say you wanted to play Attack Cyclone, you would probably start the league, you'd probably start getting into endgame when you got your hands on, or let's say you're using a two-hander, when you got your hands on, say, a 450 DPS two-hander. Now that 450 DPS two-hander is something like 60% less damage than a genuinely top-end weapon would be for your build. On the flip side, with these Spectral Shield Throw Gladiators, you can very easily pick up a Colossal Tower Shield in low-tier maps, and then just craft it with a few dense fossils until you get one of the good armor rolls, and then bench craft the other one. And you're suddenly looking at an 18 to 1900 armor shield. This 18 to 1900 armor shield is then going to be something like 60% of the damage of a mirror tier rare for your build. So because you can so easily get 60% the damage of a mirror tier weapon, that's the reason that Solo Self-Found people love Spectral Shield Throw at the moment. And also Spectral Shield Throw is just a really high performing skill in general. So with these two factors coming together, the fact that it's a good skill and the fact that it's very easy to gear for, make it very popular in Solo Self-Found. So what happens when we combine both hard modes, Solo Self-Found and Hardcore together? Well, we wind up with slightly more dominance for Spectral Shield Throw. And this time it is overwhelmingly the Gladiator Ascendancy. 95% of players in SSF Hardcore that are playing Spectral Shield Throw are playing it as a Gladiator. Tremendous amount of just sort of ease to get set up. And you'll also notice Resolute Technique is being used almost universally on these builds as well. These are not critical strike builds. These are builds that are using Resolute Technique in conjunction with Spectral Shield Throw to just do solid damage and to be very, very safe while doing so. And so that's the standout build in Solo Self-Found Hardcore for this league. What I think is really interesting, though, is the number 2, Spectral Helix. Spectral Helix is one of the brand new skills that was added, and it saw a bit of popularity early on because of the very popular streamer. I think Mathel is the most popular streamer in the game. He was streaming playing Spectral Helix in Solo Self-Found Hardcore in a self-agreed challenge with a bunch of other top players, top streamers like Zizaran and the like, where they said, all right, we're not going to use emergency logouts. We're only going to log out when we're in our hideout. And so this is a little bit of an experiment that they played for a few days to see how PathOfExile feels in Solo Self-Found Hardcore. Now, I think Mathel may have actually started Spectral Helix. He had an unfortunate death in Act 10 in a Val's side area, which looked to a lot of players like a one-shot. It was actually 3 savage hits in the space of 13 frames. So he took a savage hit from 4,300 health to 1,600 health on the first frame. Then on frame 12, he'd regen to 1,800 health by this point. He took a savage hit down to 800. And then on frame 13, he took a savage hit that killed him. So probably would have survived if he had 500 more health, or if he had a bit more block. It would have needed to be spell block though, because those last hits were spells, or for that matter, a cast when damage taken setup. But that sort of meant that a lot of players had seen, they knew Mathel would make good builds, and so they thought, all right, well, we're going to try this as well. And where Mathel got a bit unlucky in that death, I think there would have been a number of things he could have done to avoid getting in that situation, but he also got unlucky by virtue of the fact the first hit was a critical strike. He probably would have survived if he'd been a bit luckier, and so for that reason, the build seems to be pretty solid. So I'm really surprised to see it doing so well. Overwhelmingly, people are playing it as a raider for the ailment immunity that you can get there, but this seems to be something that's a bit of a breakout in Solo Self-Found Hardcore, but not really getting played anywhere else. Anyways, So that's the 3.15 meta. All in all, I think it's not as diverse as 3.14 was, but 3.14 was probably the single most diverse meta that the game has had in the 3.x era. I would say that this is actually somewhat, even maybe to my surprise, in the top 25% of the 3.x leagues in terms of skill diversity and ascendancy diversity. But we are definitely seeing a situation where there are a number of underperforming ascendancies that need a little bit of a look. But there's a lot of different skills, and importantly, there's skills that are doing well in a lot of different archetypes. So if you want to play a summoner, there's something. If you want to play a summoner, then there's something for you in the Raise Spectre. If you want to play an attack-based build, you got Spectral Shield Throw, the best skill in the league. If you want to play something that's more of a traditional bow build, you've got Toxic Rain or Caustic Arrow, or more typically you would use both of them together. And then there's a number of other things as well that are floating around that are sort of viable without being particularly great, like without being big sections of the meta, like Elemental Hit, General's Cry, Ice Trap, Lightning Arrow, and the like. So I think it's actually coming together as a fairly diverse league. I'm going to leave it there at this point. That's been a longer overview than I was expecting. But if you've got comments or questions, definitely fire away below. In terms of news, in 15 hours or so from the time this video goes live, there is going to be a very important podcast to check out. This is not me. This is the Bayclast podcast, which is probably PathOfExile's biggest podcast. It's going to have Chris Wilson speaking on it, and he's going to be interviewed by Tarkat and Octavian and Ziggy D, who are going to be talking about all things 3.15. So this will be really interesting to watch. Unfortunately for me, it's 5 a.m. my time, so I'm probably not going to actually be on it live, be able to watch it live, but I will definitely have my thoughts on it afterwards. I'll put together some sort of summary and post that to the channel. But that's all I got on this one. May your Valobs have interesting results and have fun.